In this pod, we'll focus on the difference between private and public sector organisations and their role in a mixed economy.
A private sector organisation is set up and owned by one or more private individuals. The aim of a private sector business is to generate profits for shareholders by selling goods or services. Examples of private sector businesses include shops, restaurants, taxi companies, and hairdressers. The legal structure of a private sector organisation is either unincorporated or incorporated. Remember, unincorporated means that the business and its owners are legally considered to be one entity. An owner has unlimited liability, meaning that they're personally liable for the debts of the business. This is the case for sole traders and partnerships.
When a business is incorporated, it becomes its own, separate legal entity. Its owner, or owners, have limited liability, meaning that their own personal assets are considered to be separate from those of the business. An incorporated business can either be a private limited company or a public limited company. Although it can be confusing, a public limited company operates in the private sector. It's still owned by private individuals, but it gets its name because these private individuals are members of the public.
Public sector organisations, on the other hand, are owned and controlled by central and local governments. They can also be known as public corporations, and their aim is to provide goods and services for the benefit of the population. In the UK, this includes things like education, the NHS, the fire service, and the police. Public corporations are not for profit and use taxation and government borrowing to finance their output.
Any profit generated is then reinvested into the organisation. The objective of public sector organisations is social rather than financial, and they aim to provide services in the national interest which may not be provided equitably by the private sector. Public services such as defence, flood barriers, health and education are often seen as essential needs for society, which should not be a source of profit for private individuals. This isn't a universal view, however.
In the UK, health services are free because the government owns and controls them. Tax revenue is used to finance these services, so anyone can visit a doctor or hospital without having to pay. In contrast, health services in the US are owned and managed privately, meaning that citizens must pay for healthcare personally or through their insurance.
The objective for public sector organisations is maximising social outcomes and ensuring that everyone in society has access to basic needs. Furthermore, public sector organisations are often large employers. Between 2016 and 2017, the UK government spent over £691 billion delivering public goods and services, and this included the salaries of millions of doctors, teachers, nurses, police officers, and firefighters.
Private sector goods and services, on the other hand, such as restaurants, flights, clothing, cars, and laptops, are seen as wants rather than needs for society. Therefore, they're not provided by the public sector because this would be a wasteful use of the government's tax revenue. In many economies, entrepreneurs in the private sector are tasked with providing these instead.
Most countries have mixed economies, meaning that they include a mix of both private and public sector organisations. However, the ratio of public and private sector organisations in an economy varies from country to country. The US, for example, is predominantly private sector-led, whereas China has more public sector organisations.
Deciding which industries should be privately and publicly controlled is often a matter of debate in mixed economies. In the UK, the rail services are currently owned by private sector companies such as Virgin Trains and Go Via Thameslink Railway. Rail services in the UK are privatised, so these companies operate rail services to make a profit.
However, some people aren't happy with this due to issues of poor services and high prices, and want the rail service to be nationalised. This means taking the rail industry back into government ownership, as is the case in countries like India and France. They believe that if this happened, services would improve, and prices would fall as the government would seek a more socially optimum outcome. There are debates around privatization and nationalization in many countries, particularly regarding services like health and education, because of their importance to society.